Welcome to one more chapter. Tonight, let your day melt away as we begin a quiet story made for sleep. Get cozy, breathe deeply, and allow yourself to drift, because sometimes all it takes is just one more chapter. In tonight's episode, we will be reading the story The Case of the Candlelight Cat and follow Clara Whitmore on her journey to discovering the mystery of Maplewood Hollow. The wind was a soft hush over the cobblestones of Maplewood Hollow, a sleepy village tucked beneath hills that wore their green like patchwork quilts. The scent of rain on moss still lingered from earlier in the day, and the moon had just nudged its way through a curtain of clouds, bathing the village in gentle silver. Inside a tidy brick cottage at the end of Thimbleberry Lane, Clara Whitmore was folding the edge of her favourite quilt with the precision of someone who had done this ritual for years. The kettle hissed softly from the stove, and on the windowsill, Muffin, the roundest tabby cat the village had ever known, lay sprawled in a sunbeam's memory, purring in his sleep. Clara, 62, and unapologetically particular about her evening tea, took her time steeping a fresh pot of chamomile and peppermint. The steam curled like a ghost above the delicate porcelain cup. She carried the tea to her wingback chair beside the bookshelf, where novels leaned like old friends. Just as she opened A Map of Lost Time, her latest historical fiction find, the lamp above her flickered. She looked up, frowning. She murmured. The lamp blinked again, like an indecisive wink, then steadied. She sipped her tea, eyebrows pinched together. Old wiring, she said to no one in particular, though Muffin twitched one ear in response. Clara had lived in this house for nearly 30 years. The wiring had its quirks, but the timing was odd. It always was around this time, right after sunset, and only in the sitting room. She marked her page, set down her book, and stood up. The floor creaked beneath her wool slippers as she moved to the window. Outside, all looked calm. The hedgerows still wore the glow of fairy lights from last week's garden fete, and the cobbled path was empty. Muffin, she said quietly, turning. But Muffin was gone. Her eyes scanned the room. No sign of the cat. Not on the windowsill, not curled in his fleece bed, not behind the curtain, which he had a habit of rustling dramatically. Muffin. She heard the faintest jingling sound. His bell collar, just a whisper. She opened the front door. A cool breeze met her, brushing her shawl back slightly. The porch lantern swayed above her, casting long shadows across the lawn. And then she saw him, Muffin, coming down the lane, tail in the air, strutting like he had news to report. Only, in his mouth, he held something. Clara stepped forward, squinting. Is that? It was a key. A brass key, small and old, clinking against Muffin's teeth. He padded up the steps and dropped it at her feet, then sat, proud as a knight returning from a quest. Clara crouched and picked it up. Where have you been? She whispered. The key was tarnished but ornate, with a floral loop at the top. It looked handmade, Victorian perhaps, and not one Clara recognized from her own collection of antique oddments. The wind pushed a shutter softly against the house. Clara, suddenly chilled, scooped up Muffin and the key and went inside, locking the door gently behind her. She sat back in her chair, cat on lap, key in hand. The lamp flickered again, and this time it wasn't just a flicker. It blinked rapidly, like a signal, before fading to a low trembling glow. Clara rose again, cat grumbling as he slid off her lap. She turned off the lamp, then turned it on again. still trembling. She made her way to the phone on the hallway table and dialed an all-too-familiar number. After a few rings, a voice answered, warm and gravelly. "Evening, Clara." "Edgar," she said. "Do you have a moment?" "For you?" "Always." "My lights are flickering again, and Muffin came home with a key." There was a pause. "A key?" "Yes. Brass. Rather elegant. And he looks like he's been somewhere he shouldn't. I'm coming over." She smiled despite herself. "Bring your glasses. And a flashlight." He chuckled. "And maybe cocoa." "Always." She hung up. By the time Edgar arrived, a gentle knock on the door, then the familiar click of the door opening without waiting for permission. Clara had lit a few candles. The room glowed like a storybook, full of cozy corners and shadows that danced rather than lurked. Edgar was tall and thin as a grandfather clock, with kind eyes and hands that always smelled faintly of sawdust and lemon oil. He removed his cap and stepped inside, clutching a thermos in one hand and his old magnifying glass in the other. "Now," he said, settling into the second armchair, "tell me everything." Clara recounted the flickering lights, the mysterious timing, and the gift Muffin had brought home. Edgar examined the key under his glass. "Brass," he muttered, "and old, but not ancient. Mid-1900s, perhaps. The design is floral, possibly decorative. It looks like it should open something special, or something secret." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Don't start. I'm trying to sleep tonight, not chase ghosts." But Edgar was already flipping through his pocket notebook, where he jotted down ideas for stories, inventions, and crossword clues. "Muffin's found something," he said. "We should follow him next time he slips away." Clara looked at the cat, now cleaning himself on the hearthrug, like the night's mystery was beneath him. "You think he's leading us somewhere?" "I think Muffin's smarter than we give him credit for." Clara sipped her cocoa. "Fine. But if I trip in the dark chasing your theory, I'm blaming you." Edgar grinned. "Accepted." Outside, the wind picked up just enough to rattle the ivy against the window pane. Inside, the candles flickered, not like faulty wiring, but like old friends leaning in closer. And the brass key on the side table caught the light. The next morning brought the scent of warm cinnamon and a sky the colour of soft linen. Maplewood Hollow eased into the day with its usual unhurried rhythm. Bakers arranging pastries in glass displays, children wobbling on bicycles, and the postman whistling as he wound his way through lanes lined with lavender. Clara Whitmore stood at her kitchen sink, the brass key resting in a little dish by the windowsill, next to a vase of yellow buttercups. She stirred her oatmeal absently while watching Muffin circle the table like a lion sizing up a battlefield. "Where did you go last night, she asked. Muffin yawned, stretched, and leapt up onto the chair beside her. He meowed once, a firm, expectant sound, and then jumped down again, trotting to the back door. Clara blinked. "You want to go out already? You just came in." But Muffin sat firmly, tail wrapped around his paws, and stared at the doorknob with unrelenting focus. Clara reached for her coat. "Fine, but I'm coming with you this time." She opened the door, and Muffin darted outside with purpose, his collar bell jingling like the opening notes of a mystery. Clara followed, tying her scarf around her neck and slipping a biscuit into her pocket, just in case Edgar caught up to them. The cat didn't waste a moment. He crossed the garden, squeezed through a gap in the hedge, and turned onto Featherbrush Alley, a cobblestone path that curved behind the old bakery and the milliner's shop. Clara followed at a modest distance, waving to Mrs. Pemberley, who was arranging sunflowers in her window box. Muffin stopped at the back gate of the antique shop, a wrought iron archway covered in ivy, the latch old but intact. He meowed again, then looked back at Clara, as if to say, "Well?" She hesitated. "Is someone supposed to let us in?" Just then, footsteps echoed behind her. Edgar, wool hat askew, appeared with a folded newspaper under one arm and a thermos of what Clara assumed was already lukewarm cocoa. "I saw you sneak off and thought I'd catch you," he said, slightly winded. "He leading you somewhere again?" Clara nodded toward the gate. "Straight here, and he won't move." Edgar peered through the ironwork. The antique shop behind it had once been a carriage house, long ago. It was now packed with forgotten treasures and mismatched furniture. But the back lot, gravel and grass, with a single faded bench, looked unusually tidy this morning. Clara reached out and gently lifted the gate's latch. It opened with a groan. Muffin strutted in first, nose to the ground. He padded across the yard and stopped at a patch of paving stones near the old bench. He sniffed once, then began to dig at a loose tile with his paw. Clara approached cautiously and knelt. There, beneath the edge of the stone, something metallic glinted in the earth. She brushed it free. Another key, but this one was smaller, silver and square-toothed. It was wrapped in wax paper, as if someone had taken great care to preserve it. "Another one," Edgar murmured. Clara turned the key over in her palm. "What is this? A scavenger hunt?" Edgar chuckled, but quietly. "Maybe Muffin's part of some secret society." Clara rolled her eyes. "If that's true, I want their tea recipes." Muffin meowed once more, then leapt onto the bench and sat, tail twitching, eyes wide and watchful. Clara stood, pocketing the key. "We should talk to Beatrice." Edgar nodded. "She runs the shop, doesn't she?" "She does. And she's known to have an eye for patterns in chaos." They walked around to the front entrance, where the bell above the door chimed as they stepped into the antique shop. Dust motes danced in the slanting sunlight. The shop smelled of cedar, lemon polish, and 1,000 forgotten memories. Beatrice Alcott was already at the counter, polishing a brass telescope. She was a short, sprightly woman with a silver braid down her back and half-moon spectacles perched on her nose. "Well, if it isn't Maplewood's Holmes and Watson," she said, without looking up. Clara smiled. "Morning, Bee. You're following the cat, I presume?" Clara blinked. "How did you know?" Beatrice gestured toward the window. "I saw him leap my fence like he owned the place, which, arguably, he does." Clara handed her the silver key. Beatrice paused, adjusted her spectacles, and examined it closely. "Ah," she said, "I know this one. It's not from anything sold in the shop. This is older. It matches the design used in the clock tower before the town rebuilt it in the 70s. Clara and Edgar exchanged a glance. "The old clock tower," Edgar said slowly. Clara remembered the stories. Before the current one was built, Maplewood had a wooden tower that leaned slightly, like it was too polite to stand straight. It had housed a mechanical clock that had since been dismantled. There was a legend, Beatrice said, already rifling through a drawer, that the man who built the original clock had a habit of hiding personal items inside hollow gears. "Like time capsules," Edgar mused. "Or secrets," Clara added. Beatrice smiled. "There's more truth in legend than we like to admit." She found what she was looking for. A rolled-up blueprint, yellowed and fragile. She unrolled it carefully on the counter, revealing the old tower's inner design. Clara leaned in. There, see that? Near the base of the tower, marked in faded ink. Storage drawer. Gear housing C3. Edgar let out a low whistle. You don't suppose... Clara tapped her fingers against the counter. I think we need to visit the workshop. Edgar gave a nod. I have some of the old gearwork stored in the back. They brought them to me years ago, said they were scrap. I never threw them out. Beatrice handed Clara a velvet pouch for the key. Keep it safe, and take Muffin with you. Clara raised a brow. You think he'll help? I think he knows more than we do. They thanked Beatrice and stepped outside again, Muffin padding after them like a private investigator with impeccable fur. As they walked toward Edgar's clock shop, the village went on as usual. Bees humming near flower beds, wine chimes whispering on porches, and the faint scent of baked apples drifting from the bakery. Clara clutched the key in her hand and glanced at the cat trotting ahead. Whatever lay waiting in the gears of Maplewood's past, she had a feeling Muffin already knew how it would end. The bell above Edgar's workshop door gave its familiar, cheerful jingle as Clara stepped inside. The shop smelled of oil, old wood, and the faint tang of cinnamon from the apple muffins Edgar sometimes kept stashed in a tin by the register. The walls were lined with clocks of every shape and era, all ticking in quiet unison like the heartbeat of Maplewood itself. Muffin leapt onto the front counter and sat with regal poise, tail curling neatly around his paws. He blinked at Edgar expectantly. All right, Edgar muttered. The cat wants gears. Let's give him gears. He disappeared into the back room, the swinging door thudding softly behind him. Clara leaned on the counter, fingers brushing the velvet pouch that held the silver key. Her thoughts were swimming. Keys hidden under paving stones, drawers marked on blueprints, a cat leading them like a seasoned detective. The door swung open again, and Edgar returned with a sturdy wooden box filled with brass and steel fragments. He set it on the counter, then gently pulled out a circular gear with 3 rusted screws still attached. This one came from the base of the old tower, he said. I labelled it years ago, see? Gear housing C3. Clara drew in a slow breath. The blueprint said that housing had a drawer. Edgar turned the gear over. There, beneath a rusted plate, was a small rectangular seam. They exchanged a look. He fetched a screwdriver, tongue sticking out slightly as he pried the panel loose. It popped off with a metallic sigh. Inside the hollow was a tightly folded note wrapped in oil paper. Clara took it, unwrapping it with care. It was a letter. To whomever finds this, it began, in looping cursive ink. Time has its secrets, and not all are meant to be forgotten. The letter continued, revealing that the old tower's builder, Harold Fenwick, had hidden small keepsakes inside the gears to preserve memories of those who had shaped Maplewood Hollow. This note referenced the watchful eyes and the cat's path, and ended with a simple line. Follow the tapping behind the shop where secrets used to sleep. Edgar scratched his chin. Tapping behind the shop? Clara straightened. Beatrice mentioned noises behind her place. They closed up the workshop and made their way back through the winding streets. The antique shop glowed warmly ahead, but instead of entering through the front, Clara led them down the narrow alley beside it. At the far end, near the ivy-covered wall, there was a tall wooden fence. They paused. No sound. Then, tap, tap, tap. Soft and rhythmic, like the ticking of a reluctant heartbeat. Clara stepped closer and gently pushed the gate. It creaked open. Beyond the fence was a hidden courtyard, partly overgrown, with old crates and a leaning shed. And there, standing with a plate of cookies in her hand, was Mrs. Winslow, Beatrice's cousin and the village's most enthusiastic knitter. "Oh," she said, blinking. "Clara, Edgar, I didn't expect company." Clara smiled cautiously. "We heard tapping." "Oh, heavens," Mrs. Winslow chuckled. "That would be this rascal." She stepped aside, revealing a small mechanical bird tapping gently against a window, its gears exposed and flapping in futile motion. "Bee found it last week in a trunk," she explained. "She said it reminded her of her grandfather's inventions. I've been tinkering with it." Clara felt a flicker of disappointment, but also curiosity. "Your grandfather, Harold Fenwick," Mrs. Winslow smiled. "That's right. He was always hiding little stories in the most inconvenient places. Said life was more interesting with puzzles." Clara reached into her coat and handed her the folded letter. Mrs. Winslow read it silently, eyes misting. "I thought all of his letters were gone," she said softly. "He always wanted people to look closer. Said the world kept its beauty tucked just out of reach." She invited them inside for tea, and Clara and Edgar found themselves seated at a round table, with a tin of ginger cookies between them and Muffin already curled on the windowsill. "I remember something," Mrs. Winslow said, after a thoughtful pause. "When I was young, he used to say the most important key was the one that found you." Clara smiled, glancing at Muffin. "I think we've already found it." Edgar chuckled. "Or it found us." They sat in the warmth of the kitchen, sipping tea, listening to the faint ticking of the repaired bird and the gentle rustle of ivy just outside. And for a moment, the mystery felt less like something to be solved and more like something meant to be shared. Back in Edgar's workshop, the ticking of a dozen clocks echoed softly as Clara laid the folded letter on the counter once more. Outside, the sun had begun to dip below the roof lines, casting warm amber streaks across the polished wooden floor. Edgar dusted off his hands and reached into a drawer beneath the main workbench. From it, he pulled a stack of old manila folders, labeled in his tidy, looping handwriting. Gear schematics, tower blueprints, and some clippings from the Maplewood Gazette, he said, laying them out. Clara ran her fingers over the yellowed paper. "You've kept all of this." "I never throw away a good story," Edgar replied, "especially one with moving parts." He unrolled the blueprint of the old clock tower again and placed a paperweight, shaped like a sleeping owl, at one corner. "See here," he pointed. "The original housing unit for Gear C3 connects to a compartment beneath the main gear console. According to this, there should have been a second drawer." Clara raised an eyebrow. "We only found one letter." "Which means," Edgar said, tapping the blueprint, "there's something else, still hidden." Muffin, who had been asleep beside the radiator, suddenly stood, stretched, and trotted over to the far wall. He stopped beside a tall, antique grandfather clock, one that hadn't chimed in years, and pawed gently at the base. Clara followed his gaze. "Is this from the old tower?" Edgar squinted. "It might be. I got it at an estate sale years ago. Never could get it working again." He knelt and opened the lower hatch. Inside, behind a tangle of silent gears and dust, was a small, locked drawer. Clara's heart skipped. The brass key. She pulled the pouch from her coat pocket and fit the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside the drawer lay a small velvet box, a folded note, and an old photograph, sepia-toned, curled at the corners. The picture showed 3 young people standing in front of the original Maplewood clock tower. A young man with wild hair and a wide grin, a woman with a ribbon in her braid, and another man, slightly more serious, but smiling all the same. Clara recognized one of them instantly. "Beatrice," she whispered. "That's her." Edgar picked up the note. It read, "To the Keeper of Time, should these hands reach you, know that the story continues where laughter echoes and regrets rest quietly in the chimes. Forgive what was forgotten. Remember what mattered." Clara's voice was soft. Harold Fenwick must have left this for her. Edgar opened the velvet box. Inside was a brooch, an intricate gear design made of silver and glass, set with a tiny sapphire at its center. Delicate, timeless. He held it out to Clara. "We should return this to Beatrice." Clara nodded and showed her the photo. "I think this was meant for her." They stepped out into the early evening, the sky painted with strokes of plum and peach. The walk back to the antique shop was quiet, contemplative. Muffin padded ahead, tail upright, like he knew his part in all this was nearly complete. The bell above Beatrice's door chimed as they entered. She looked up from polishing a silver teapot and tilted her head. "Back again." Clara handed her the photograph. For a moment, Beatrice said nothing. Her eyes shimmered. "That's me," she said quietly. "And that's Harold. And, oh, Elliot, my brother." Clara laid the note and brooch beside the picture. Beatrice picked them up gently, her fingers trembling. She clutched the brooch, then looked up, smiling through tears. "I thought it was all lost. He promised me something once. A gift hidden in time. But I never found it." Edgar smiled softly. "It found you." They sat in the shop's front room, sharing the stillness as golden light bathed the wooden floor and danced off the glass cases. "I remember now," Beatrice whispered. "Harold used to say that clocks weren't meant to remind us how much time we've lost, but how much we still have left." Clara reached for the kettle. "Then let's not waste a second of it." As tea brewed and laughter warmed the corners of the room, the old clock tower gears, forgotten in corners and drawers for decades, seemed to hum once more, as if time had turned not forward or back, but inward, where memories ticked on in hidden hearts. And Muffin, purring softly by the fire, blinked once and closed his eyes, his job, at least for tonight, done. That evening, Clara returned home beneath a sky scattered with stars like spilled sugar. The village was hushed, houses dimly lit behind lace curtains, the hush of nightfall gently pressing down like a velvet blanket. She turned the brass key in her front door, stepped into her warm cottage, and sighed. Muffin sauntered in behind her, plopping directly onto the rug like a tired hero after a long journey. Clara lit the lanterns in the sitting room, each flame flickering to life and casting golden glows on the bookshelves. She set the velvet box with the brooch and photograph onto her writing desk, beside the letters from Harold Fenwick. A cozy stillness settled around her. Moments later, there was a soft knock at the door. Edgar. He held a basket wrapped in a tea towel, from which the unmistakable smell of honey scones rose. "They were warm when I left," he said with a sheepish grin. "They'll do," Clara said, smiling as she stepped aside to let him in. They sat by the fireplace, mugs of tea in hand, watching as Muffin made one triumphant circle around the armchair before curling into a purring loaf. "So," Edgar said after a sip, "a cat led us to a family's lost story, a village's hidden memory, and a brooch that hadn't seen the light in 50 years. Clara chuckled. "You say it like it's strange." "It is strange," he said. But also, exactly right, she nodded. Do you think Harold meant for it all to come back now? I think, Edgar said thoughtfully, that he knew time has a way of circling back. We all carry unfinished melodies. Sometimes it just takes a cat to play the next note. A comfortable silence fell between them. Then the lights flickered. Clara's eyebrows lifted. Edgar stood and went to inspect the wiring along the baseboards. I'll bet it's that old switch again. But Clara followed the flicker's rhythm with her eyes. It was pulsing. 3 short blinks, 2 long. Morse, she whispered. Edgar turned slowly. Did you see that too? Clara nodded. 3 short, 2 long. The same as the tapping behind the shop. They exchanged a glance. Clara reached into a drawer and pulled out a small metal device. The antique light box she'd bought from Beatrice years ago and forgotten. It had never worked properly. Edgar took it in hand, adjusted a tiny dial on the side, and the lights blinked again. 3 short, 2 long. Suddenly, it clicked. It's not a fault, he said. It's a message. They set the device on the table. Inside the casing was a tiny edged plate, in memory of time well shared. It bore initials H, F, and E, B. Harold Fenwick and Elliot Bell, Edgar whispered. Your brother, Clara said softly. Edgar sat down slowly. He must have added this after I left for the city. I had no idea. The blinking slowed, then stopped altogether. The cottage lights glowed steadily once more. Edgar looked over at Muffin. How long do you suppose he's known? Clara laughed gently. Since before we noticed. The clock on the wall chimed softly, just once. They listened to the echo as it settled into silence. Clara poured them each another cup of tea, added a splash of milk to hers. Outside, the wind rustled the ivy against the window panes. Inside, warmth filled every corner. They sat for a long time. Eventually, Clara reached for the candle on the side table and lit it. Its light didn't flicker. Mystery solved, she said. Edgar leaned back with a contented sigh. And just in time. Clara looked at him. For what? For the night to begin. They sat in the glow of the candle, surrounded by clocks and cats, brooches and scones, tea and time. Outside, Maplewood Hollow slept peacefully. Inside, all was well.